Hello and welcome to the interview on France 24. I'm Robert Parsons in Kigali, Rwanda, the venue this year for the Mo Ibrahim Prize for Achievement in African Politics. It's awarded to a former executive head of state or government by an independent prize committee composed of eminent figures, including 2 Nobel Peace Prize laureates. The winner this year is our guest today, former Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who stepped down as president in 2017 after completing 2 terms in office. The first democratic transfer in Liberia's history. Madam President, thank you very much for being with us on France 24 today.
Pleasure to be with you.
12 years in power. You came to office at a very difficult time after the Civil War. The interethnic strife. You then had to face a crisis over Ebola as well. Is there something you would have done differently looking back now?
Perhaps in trying to manage expectations, I would have been able to identify many more women to take responsibility. Because women just happen to govern in a different way, a way that brings more honesty, more efficiency, and more compassion. Perhaps I would have tried my best to do something about the political system, so that we don't have these outrageous competition when no criteria for leadership had been clearly established. So those were the things that perhaps made politics much more intense, and that took away from being able to concentrate on the rebuilding of society and improving, of the welfare condition of the people. So,
nevertheless, you did hold successful elections last year. What lessons do you think the Liberian election of 2017 offers to other countries around the continent?
It says that at the end of the day, the people's will, the people's choice, will need to be respected. And so that's what happened in the Liberian elections. Any attempt to obstruct free choice is bound to lead to disastrous consequences. And so I'm glad that through our electoral system, despite all the challenges, despite all the toxic, atmosphere that was created as a result of a very rugged competition among so many people, despite all of that, our system allowed the freedom of choice. And majority of the people, young people in our country, spoke. And they spoke through the ballot box and not the bullet.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things that this meeting in Kigali is about, first of all, is the issue of good governance and good policy, good public services, on the basis of good democratic practice. But there are many people who would argue, that do indeed argue, that the first thing you have to do in poor countries is not introduce democratic practice. That's a luxury. What you need to do is ensure the economy is functioning properly, that there is growth, that you have good health service, that you have good education and so forth. Is that an argument that you would agree with, that democracy in poor countries, like many in Africa, is a luxury?
No, I don't share that view. I do believe that it's possible to be able to meet those essential things of the welfare of the people, and at the same time allow the people the liberty to choose, the liberty to participate. I also think that any democracy has to also take into account the culture, the tradition, the specificity of every country if you want it to succeed. And so why democracy prevails, and I think democracy also has a positive correlation with development. But I also say democracy is not one size fits all. Democracy must also take into account the context of the local environment. And that leads to different kinds of timing and sequencing to bring about the development results that you want.
But this must have been something, a big issue that you had to struggle with as well, because Liberia, like Rwanda today, is struggling with a past of civil war, interethnic strife, in which reconciliation is a major issue. I mean, I just wonder that in democratic conditions, or any conditions for that matter, is real reconciliation possible after those sort of experiences, or are those wounds something that are going to fester, come what may, almost forever?
Reconciliation is possible, and I think you might say Rwanda.
But very tough in democratic conditions.
But very difficult. Yeah. And if you're dealing in a country like ours, where you have multiple ethnic groups having gone to war with each other several times over our history, and where you have people who have been leading war groups now have been elected by their people and are sitting there and working as part of the government, it makes it very difficult to manage and to make sure that you maintain the peace. And we never forgot, I never forgot, whatever we did, we needed sustained peace. Because
do you achieve that by putting the lid on society, or do you approach it differently?
Look, I think, as a matter of fact, we threw the lid away in Liberia's case. That's why I took a lot of political beatings to ensure that we sustained that peace, because I knew the history of nations that have been in conflict, that if that process of transition is not managed carefully with great risk to yourself, there's a revert to conflict. The record was very clear. So I had a choice between, am I going to move very harshly on people, you know, who have committed atrocities? And bear in mind, we're not talking about individual crimes. We're talking about mass crimes by population, by young people who were child soldiers who did not even know what they were doing. We had to ensure that we gave them a feeling of hope, that we gave them a better life, before looking back to say, you know, where are we now going to address the issues of justice, the issues of, you know. That's why I say timing, sequencing, whatever you do in a post-conflict environment has to be taken within the context of the situation. You can't just apply a rule from a Western democracy.
I'd like to ask you a slightly different but related question, but nepotism and corruption, which continue to be big problems, not just in Africa, but everywhere. How do you develop those strong institutions and the rule of law in countries in which other loyalties are often much stronger than those?
Through inclusiveness. Inclusiveness of those who may be of a different political orientation. Participation, reaching out, but even when you deal with, say, nepotism, here you're dealing with political dividends, nepotism, corruption, political dividends. You're dealing with personal relationships, particularly, again, everything in the context of Liberia. There's a small society, less than 5 million people, the entire country. Strong personal relationship.
Everybody knows everybody.
Everybody knows everybody. Limited skills available at a time when you have an enormous agenda to try to recover a devastated country. Many times people then compare Liberia with some other country. There's no comparison. You have to be able to look at the history, the culture, the tradition, the circumstances of the country. And
we're running out of time. I just want to put one last question to
Yeah.
you. You served 2 terms as president of Liberia, and then, according to the constitutional terms, you voluntarily stepped down. But weren't you tempted just a little bit to stay on?
I had first said I was going to do 1 term. I did not, because at that time, we just had all the plans and we had made all the arrangements for being able to push the economy forward. I knew that I could not do more than a 2nd term. 1, the Constitution did not allow that, and I wanted to respect the Constitution.
But you could have tried to change the Constitution.
2, my age did not allow that. And I don't think the young people would have tolerated that.
Ellen Johnson Sirleaf.
So the thing to do was to let go.
Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, thank you very much for being on the program with us today. That's all we have time for, unfortunately. To the viewers, thank you too for being with us. And don't go away, stay with us. More news and headlines to follow.